Welcome to the Protego Foundation's book club. We're going to be talking about Order of the Phoenix this time. Thanks to everybody for joining in. So I wanted to start this one with a quote from Hermione that really kind of stood out to me. It was while she was talking to Lupin. I'm pretty sure she was talking about SPEW, but she was trying to relate it to her audience. And she said, "It's the same kind of nonsense as werewolf segregation, isn't it? It all stems from this horrible thing wizards have of thinking they're superior to other creatures." And once again, I was just like, wow, I'm surprised that that was included in the book. I kind of forgot about that line. And it's pretty relatable, but I thought it was interesting how she was at least trying to, think about who she was talking to and kind of tailor it. So I was wondering if, since we saw a lot about SPEW in the last book, and we talked about how Hermione could improve with her activism and just the way that she approaches it, do we think that she's improved since Goblet of Fire? I think she still has some work to do, but do we think she's gotten any better or worse?
I guess I'll go first. I see a little bit of improvement. Like she's kind of toned down her angst about it, as it were. And she's trying to, I guess, engage people more by like showing through her own actions what she does rather than like shouting things at them. But in a sense, she's still kind of stuck in the Goblet of Fire phase because she hasn't like fully grasped how to, I guess, bring people on board with her activism. So I guess it's kind of like she's still on the learning path, as it were. Any other thoughts on that from anybody?
I feel like she's still kind of in her like new activism phase, kind of what you were saying is, I mean, I find that relatable when you first become vegan or just start caring in general about animals and you first learn what happens and you're just shocked and you can't believe that that's reality. And then when other people don't seem to care, it just shocks you even more. So I think she's still kind of dealing with that. But she's gotten a little bit trickier too in this one by like trying to trick them and leaving the hats and everything. So I don't know. She hasn't really gained any allies in this book, has she?
I don't think so. I'm trying to remember if it was this book or last book where like Mr. Weasley kind of showed some sympathy to her cause, like just verbally, but he was like, "Now is not the time." I can't remember if it was Goblet of Fire or this book. But yeah, on the whole, people are still kind of like, whatever.
Yeah.
But that was a good point about like how she's like knitting these hats and gloves and or like scarves or whatever for the house elves and trying to trick them into setting themselves free rather than like trying to engage in dialogue with them or like showing them alternatives to what they're currently doing, which almost kind of seems like a similar thing to the people that quote employ the house elves. Like she's putting her own thoughts and wishes on them rather than having them have like self-determination.
Yeah,
Like I don't think that's the best way to go about it.
she kind of goes back and forth with like her goals because she'll say that she just wants better conditions and wages for them, but then she's also trying to completely free them. So I think she just needs to figure out like the middle ground where and just focus on the conditions.
Mhm.
And I know she said something about wanting to when she was asked what she wants to do after Hogwarts, she immediately she wants to take SPEW further. It's kind of inspiring just to know that you can make a difference if you are determined enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing she did was she said she kind of wanted to make people think about things differently and see what it's like to be an elf. So she had suggested doing a sponsored scrub of the Gryffindor common room, which no one's gonna do that. Like I don't think anyone would line up to clean. But she takes the opportunity whenever, like when Ron is complaining about cleaning, she's like, well, how do you think the elves feel? Like look at it from their perspective and everything.
Yeah. And that's the good way that she should continue, like using that line of thinking and dialogue with people, like get them to be like, put yourself in their shoes, like that's how you get people to feel sympathy. So yeah, you should keep going with that tack.
That makes me think of these days I keep seeing it come up where people are like upset about being in quarantine, and then some activists are like, well, animals are always in quarantine. So how do we feel about making those kinds of connections? Because it's not the same, but it's at least trying to like make your life relate to theirs. But I feel like some people might disagree with that type of messaging. So what do we think about that?
There was one moment when Dobby came into the room of requirement to tip them off about Umbridge, and he started to punish himself. And it was just like one little line, but it gave me a little bit of hope, because especially after that comment she made with Ron, I was like, okay, maybe she's learning a little bit more on the activism front. But the line was something to the tune of, it expressed empathy, and it was something to the tune of like Hermione and a few other girls in DA looked almost, I don't know if it was like shock or disgust or something like that, but almost as if they were called to do what Harry was doing and like rip him away. And there's something really sweet in that. Like maybe it's baby steps, and maybe it's those conversational moments of either education or empathy, like with Ron in the common room that we were discussing about before. But I don't know, sometimes a win's a win when it comes to a certain cause or a certain bout of activism, or bit of activism, I should say. And there little observations like that, maybe little breadcrumbs that the author was dropping throughout. But that was one thing I was like, oh, you go, girl. Like, this is a desired effect that you're working towards.
Yeah, I love that. And definitely, like, everybody reacts to a different thing. Like, some people, the empathy works. I mean, we always talk about in veganism, it's like, are you an ethical vegan, or is it for the environment or your health? So you have to really just like know your audience. So
I like to say, like, in that case, you have to meet people where they're at. And I think particularly with that instance with Dobby, the people in that room were already sort of like primed for activism in a way, just maybe not the SPEW kind that Hermione had been thinking of, but like when they see, someone being hurt by like the system around them, and they like see the physical effects of it, then they're like, oh, that's what that's what Hermione was talking about. Like, this is why that's a problem, type of thing. But yeah, not everyone's gonna have that same like sympathetic reaction, unfortunately. It just kind of like depends who you're talking to. But I don't see like personally, I don't see any problem with, in particular, using like quarantine language to describe like how animals feel in captivity. There's some other, conversations going on around like, not using like enslavement language because that's insensitive to people of color, which I agree with. But I think the quarantine language is a good way to kind of be like, well, hey, this is how you felt in quarantine. Imagine how these animals feel when they have to do that like 24/7 for years and years. Like, I think that's a good line of like verbiage to use.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, by the way, at the beginning, I forgot to ask, everyone put your house in the comments so you can get some house points.
That's super important.
Before I forget, because I don't know everybody. Okay, well, since we're talking about elves, we can talk about Creature, who made his debut in this book. She Hermione was always sticking up for him, of course. But everyone else was kind of saying that he's crazy, he's like out of his mind. And Creature does say some pretty bad things to the people in the house, and he's obviously been convinced to have a certain mindset towards wizards and purebloods, very different from Dobby, which I find interesting because Dobby also grew up, well, did he grow up with the Malfoys, or did he start working for them later on? Do we know?
I am unclear on that piece of trivia.
Because we know that Creature grew up working in the house, since we see his ancestors hanging from the wall, which is pretty morbid. So I'm wondering if Dobby had the same upbringing, but he just has a completely different personality to make him resistant.
I think like his family had always served the Malfoy family, but I don't know like at what age he was like tasked with actually like doing things.
Yeah. It's just interesting how they have different, like completely different perspectives. And I'm wondering, because Creature is so fond of his master, maybe she was just nice to him, whereas Dobby is always being abused. Do we know? Does it say in the book at all about back when the House of Black, when they were all actually around?
I don't think the book ever mentioned Creature specifically being mistreated by like everyone other than Sirius. Like,
right. Yeah.
I was trying to put that in a polite way. I think, I mean, yeah, he was definitely like brainwashed into their way of thinking, but I don't think the book specifically mentioned any type of like physical mistreatment that he might have endured. But that may have just been like, because we're looking at it from like, that was his past and we don't really need to see his past. Like he could have been mistreated. We just don't really know.
Yeah. It does say that the family tradition of beheading the elves when they got too old to carry tea trays, I feel like maybe the elves should have an opinion about that, but it seems like maybe it's just like a noble thing, like, and then maybe it inspires them to work as long as possible, but it's pretty terrible. But anyway, do you think that it's right for Hermione to not hold Creature accountable for his opinions? And just, I mean, obviously what he thinks is kind of wrong. But Hermione is insistent on like standing up for him and not treating him poorly. So do we think that's right? Do we think that Creature should be allowed to be like redeemed, or has he just, is it like a lost cause? What do you think? Like, what would you do if you're Hermione in that situation?
There's a difference between him being allowed to be redeemed and what he is doing being sort of deemed acceptable and sort of like, oh no, it's fine, he just kind of grew up that way. Because the elves are fully sentient and creatures, like they're very clearly capable of learning and growing. Like we see that with Dobby, that a lot of his perspective on the world grows and changes throughout the books as he starts to experience more freedom. So it's something where I don't think what Creature is doing should be being viewed as acceptable, but it's sort of the understandable but not acceptable. Well, just because, you kind of, make space for the fact, hey, that is not okay. We need to learn and do better. but I understand why you think this. That does not mean thinking this is good or okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Oh, and Temple just brought up in the chat about Stockholm syndrome, developing positive feelings toward a captor or abuser, and that was a thought that crossed my mind too. I was like, creatures like the epitome of Stockholm syndrome in that manner. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that kind of applies to all of the elves. I feel like that's really interesting. I don't know too much about that syndrome, but maybe the elves were kind of like based on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. And I mean, if we want to compare the elves and their thought process to animals, like I don't know. Do you feel like that's I mean, not so much factory farms. I don't think those animals would ever be like, oh yeah, this is how things are supposed to be, and just like okay with it. But maybe more like animals who are treated well, like well enough, but are still being used, like horses or even farmed animals that aren't on factory farms that, you know, people are always saying, well, they have a good life, you know, like they're out in the field. They're happy for the time, but they're still not also really aware of what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, that's one like aspect that I can definitely see being the case with, you mentioned horses, so like particularly with like maybe horse racing or something, where the animals really are mistreated, but they still kind of behave in a like a genial manner, and like they don't like misbehave because of their treatment. But then I can also see like sort of similar to what Creature does, like when he's, you know, in captivity and everything, basically, some dogs, you know, that are held captive and used for breeding purposes or for fighting, they lash out kind of like Creature does. I mean, he's not like outwardly violent, but you can tell that his thoughts are pretty violent. And yet, like, we hold the dogs accountable for that behavior rather than the people that raised them and made them like into what they are. So like I kind of see some similarities between Creature and like dogs that are or chickens even that are used for fighting.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good comparison.
It just popped into my head when Nicole was talking about it. I was like, oh, this is good. Good
comparison. Yeah, wow. Okay. Well, similar to the elves, then we have goblins too, which similar but very different, because they're not completely controlled by wizards, but they still have a lot of their rights taken away, and that is controlled by wizards. At some point, they're talking in the house, and Lupin is saying that there's a chance they'll join Voldemort because they'll be offered freedoms that haven't been given to them by wizards. So that's kind of like completely pointing out that there's a huge flaw in the system. So I don't know, do the wizards ever kind of like process that further?
I'm trying to remember, I think not in this book, but I think in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, not the screenplay, but the book that Newt Scamander wrote, whatever, where they define all of the different creatures. They talk more about like goblins and non-human or part human animals that are like more supposedly more sentient than animals, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Because there's beasts, and then if Tyler was here, he would just recite the entire book right now. Do you remember that?
Well, I've got the book actually. Let me see if I can pull that up.
Yeah, there are different levels.
It's beasts versus beings. So there was a whole thing where there were multiple different conventions, and at what point do you count as a being instead of a beast? Beings are viewed as being able to participate in their own governance. There were multiple different points where they went through different things for what would qualify you as a being. First, they went through like if you can communicate properly with wizards, which you then had. I think it might have been the goblins, but I don't remember completely. Who brought in a bunch of things that could mimic human speech, but were definitively not. We're not thinking of the things they were saying as real words. So then that kind of got thrown out, and then there was a series of other things where it's like if you were walking on two legs, which then had mermaids, and basically there was a long series of at what point are you a being and therefore were entitled to additional rights, and at what point are you a beast, with a still not so great line between the two.
Right, and still not allowed to have wands. And the centaurs, right, they refused to be classified as beings because they just didn't agree with any of it, right? So
Yeah.
Well, they agree with the rules because the rules were made by wizards, which didn't take the centaur's feelings into account, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Which definitely comes into play in this book. One of my favorite parts of the entire book, even though like it's kind of violent, I'm just like, yes, the centaurs are taking back the forest from the humans. Because like, I mean, technically it's not like anybody's forest, but like it's true that like in the span of the books, like people have really encroached on the centaur space. They've encroached on the acromantula space, and like it's kind of nice to see the centaurs be like, you know what, just get off our lawn.
Yeah. Especially because if magic, like if wands weren't a factor, like if you put a human against a centaur is gonna win. So they've just been suppressed. But similar to humans, like in the Muggle world, we use so many different like weapons to control animals that if we didn't have those, we would get nowhere.
Yeah, and intelligence is a major factor, which not even all humans would pass the test in that case.
I agree with that. Let's see. So Elizabeth is mentioning how the Quibbler calls Fudge a goblin crusher. And how he is supposedly done in goblins by drowning, dropping them off of buildings, poisoning, and cooking them in pies, which, yeah, it all seems very, like, disturbing, but...
I mean, I wonder if there is, like, an element of truth to that. In not necessarily in, like, oh my gosh, he's, like, cooked them in pies. But, like, I mean, he could, especially, like, since he's, like, very in cahoots with Umbridge, like, I could see him being very, like, anti-goblin, and kind of like trying to restrain their rights and everything. So maybe there's like an element of truth to that.
Nicole said magic is might after all. So yeah, it's, yeah. Just the desire to be in control of everyone else is a major flaw in humanity. But I think it's pretty fascinating that the books touch on all of this whole system like going on in the background that doesn't directly relate to the plot like entirely. But just the fact that it's thought through and it's all in there is really fascinating. And then of course in the Ministry there's the Fountain of Magical Bretheren, which at first glance is supposed to symbolize like a union between the different species, but it's just they're completely represented incorrectly and in favor of wizards because the centaur, the goblin, and the elf are all gazing up at the wizard and witch like adoringly, which is Harry notes is not even realistic from the ones that he's met in the past. So yeah.
But it's nice in reality that they put the man at the top, because that's
That
what
too. It literally says that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. Did you want to talk more about centaurs? I can hand that to you, Catherine.
I mean, yeah, we can go ahead and talk about that. I mean, like, they come up a lot in this book. Like, in many ways, I think it's a good representation of how beings apart from humans are, like, you know, capable of their own intelligence and their own thought process, and, you know, they have their own language to describe things, and their own politics even. Because obviously we've got Ferenz, who is, like, kicked out of the herd for having opposing, like, I guess you could call them political views with the rest of the herd. And, like, I feel like I can't think of a specific like analogy in nature, but I'm pretty sure that does happen. Like, I think I've heard of, like, elephants being kicked out of a herd, or, like, lions being kicked out of their whatever their groups are called or something. But
yeah,
then
but I don't think that's for political reasons.
no, it's probably more for, like, survival reasons.
Right.
But I mean, like, I think my favorite moment, like I said, with the centaurs comes when Umbridge is, like, you know, basically, like, demeaning them to their faces and expecting that she's gonna have the upper hand with her human magic, and then, like, she doesn't. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that particular scene, more towards the end of the book, and how it, like, represents kind of like animals basically taking back their or, like, holding their own against a human. Like, what are our thoughts on that scene?
Well, humans are always thinking that we are at the top of everything and in charge of everything. And every once in a while, a poacher gets trampled by an elephant, or eaten by a lion, or not eaten, but attacked by a lion, and things like that. I mean, people who work in factory farms get injured by the animals a lot, which makes the person more abusive towards future animals, unfortunately. But
Yeah, Perth said most satisfying scene. That's all. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's actually one of the scenes that's, like, great in the books and the movies, and I'm just like, they did that part so well. I wish more people would kind of see that there is that analogy to be made from that scene, about, you know, humans thinking that they're superior over other animals, and how, you know, when we see Umbridge doing it, we abhor it. But then, like, when people in our world do it, a lot of us kind of see it as normal and turn a blind eye to it. And even, like, you know, Hermione and Harry, like, they weren't necessarily intending this in a bad way, but they did actually, as the centaurs pointed out, like, use the centaurs against their will, to, I guess, like, get rid of Umbridge for them. So I think that scene is so nuanced, and it has, like, so many good things that we can take from it about how, in particular, like, the humans in the magical world interact with other species, but it also says a lot about what we as humans do in our world. But yeah, that statue with the centaur and the witch and wizard makes me laugh quite a lot, because they would not be happy with that.
No, and they've probably never even seen it. They don't even know.
No, they probably don't even care. They're like, mystery, psh, whatever.
Yeah, so one thought that I had just with the ministry, the way that Fudge decides to ignore reality and turn the blind eye because he doesn't want it to be happening, made me think a lot of just people eating animals. Even though they know what happens, they try to convince themselves that it's not happening. So, but at some point you have to, like, face reality. But I don't know how to get people to do that in the real world, unfortunately.
That's a good point. And I guess, like, the moment when Fudge realizes that he's been wrong, and he can't be blind anymore is like when it's put right in front of him, like physically right in front of him. And I think that's the same case for a lot of people in this world. Like they're not going to make that association between what's on their plate and how it gets there until like they literally see how it happens, which is why documentaries are great. Because it kind of like opens a lot of people's eyes to what's going on.
I've actually never watched any like vegan documentaries, but I would like to. I'm just kind of,
I mean, they can be a little bit biased for sure, but
yeah,
they do present a lot of like good factual information. And in particular, I actually went vegan because of a lot of like short like YouTube documentaries talking about like what goes on in factory farms and stuff like that. I mean, basically that's how I became vegetarian and then vegan, was because I was presented with this information like right in front of my eyes, and I was like, once I know this, I can't go back to how I was thinking before.
Mm-hmm.
So
I literally had a talk with my mom because I try not to bring it up, but if someone says something, I can't help it. And she was saying that baby cows don't have to die for milk. And I was like, but they do. Like, I've told you all about this before, and you're gonna tell me that they don't have to. But actually her point was that they don't have to. It's just that's what we do to them, which was true. But I always kind of like, I don't know how to get people to watch the documentaries because I just don't think they would enjoy them.
I mean, that is a struggle, because sometimes like if I've shared them with people in the past, even just sharing them on Facebook or something, people are like, ew, why would you share that? I'm like, well, I mean, maybe that says something if you're saying ew. Like I think people don't want to be confronted with it sometimes. But I think having them on like streaming giants like Netflix is great, because before, Netflix and stuff like that, the only way to view those documentaries was like in a theater or by getting a DVD. And like they're super accessible now. And they are pretty popular. There are so many popular vegan documentaries or animal rights documentaries that people can see online. And I think accessibility is also another thing that we have to consider, like when helping people get on that path towards learning about animal rights, is like, they need to have access to the information and access to those documentaries. Unfortunately, in Fudge's case, he had access to everything and just didn't do anything with it.
Right. I mean, pretty much everyone has like Netflix, at least one of them, one of the streaming services. What is everyone's favorite documentary, if you have one?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because I've had some friends who recommend documentaries to me, like Game Changers was a big one. I had a few friends reach out and like, have you seen this? Because they know that I'm vegan, and I'm like, no. They're like, well, you need to watch it. I'm like, actually, you need to watch it. And it sounds like they did, and it actually made an impact on them. So I'm like, yay. But part of it, I don't feel like I necessarily need to watch them because I'm already vegan. But I feel like it can help, like, still like give you the facts that you can then share with other people.
Yeah. I know Seaspiracy is a big one right now. That people have been watching. My favorite, it wasn't specifically like a vegan documentary. It was definitely more about animal rights. I think it was kind of like the documentary that started the whole craze of like doing these types of documentaries. It was The Cove.
I have seen that. Okay.
Yeah. That one was really good. Cowspiracy is a good one. Thanks for the reminder, Mallory. There's so many good ones.
Does Cowspiracy show any factory farm footage? Like, I'm assuming they balance it really well to not like traumatize people, but to also inform them and kind of like give them an intro.
remember. I saw it when it first came out. Like this was before it was streaming or anything like that. I went to an event at a library that showed it, and that was like a long time ago. I don't really remember much about it, but it was mostly about like the agriculture side of it, like the methane production from cows, factory farms, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I need to just sit down and watch them.
Yeah, and there's also like What the Health, Food Incorporated.
Forks Over Knives, is that?
Oh yeah, that one's a good one too.
Let's see, Earthlings, yeah, Dominion, Game Changer.
I would also recommend Blackfish.
Blackfish,
Not specifically vegan, but definitely heavily animal rights oriented.
Sure. Yeah, I did see
that one. I remember when that one first came out, everyone was like, I'll never go to SeaWorld again, but they're still in business.
Promises don't last, do they?
They are changing slowly. So it did make an impact for sure. Because I feel like, well, didn't the CEO of SeaWorld like quit shortly after that?
I don't remember.
They've had issues for sure.
A little bit off the subject, I've been watching really bad TV lately. Baywatch I've been watching, and Pam Anderson, who is very famously vegan, and I just watched an episode last night where she went to SeaWorld and like fell in love with the trainer there or something, and she was like helping an abandoned or orphaned dolphin find a new mom or something like that. I can't remember. Her character does mention like not eating red meat, and like she orders salads a lot. So I don't know if she was vegetarian or vegan at the time of the filming, but maybe that's one of the things that opened her eyes, is like filming that scene.
Wow.
Interesting.
I've never seen Baywatch, but I didn't know it had stuff like that.
I don't know. Long, and I'm done with it already, like after season 3.
I have you heard of Animal? It's like a VR experience.
I'm not sure.
I think I heard about it from the Chick Peeps. I think they had like the creators of it on. And I was at like a vegan festival, and they had it, and I was already vegan. It was like a year ago, and for some reason I decided that I should watch it. And you're in the slaughterhouse and you pick the animal that you want to watch their life.
Oh.
And you see everything, and it was very traumatizing. But anyways, okay, we should probably get back to
I feel like once you're vegan, those things get even more traumatizing. Like it's shocking the first time, but then after you're vegan, it's like even more like intense because your empathy is already like super high, and you're like,
yeah, like sometimes it's good to have the reminder, but other times it just like it really affects your mood. Like I felt like a dementor came. I was just like, I felt sick. I felt sick.
That's a great analogy for like activism fatigue.
I just remembered at a music festival I went to many years ago, they had one of those VR like booths or something, and they were paying people $1 or $2 to watch a couple of minute video of like.
I didn't even get paid.
Yeah, people were watching it and they got paid to do it, and I don't know. I never heard of them again, so I don't know if it was very successful, but I remember that now.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, had a little tangent there.
Good tangent.
So let's see. There are a couple of instances of testing. Well, there are always instances of animal testing in these books through mainly Transfiguration class. But we also got a moment where Fred and George are basically testing on children. And Hermione obviously has a big issue with that, against the rules, and they're testing their fainting fancies, and they didn't tell the children what was happening. They're just like, here are some sweets. But in comparison, they'll practice banishing spells on snails and, all of those things. So why do you, I don't understand people who don't see humans and other species on the same level. Like, I don't know, just an example. Like if I were to hit an animal on accident driving my car, I would feel as if I hit a human. Like it's the same to me as far as how awful it is. I don't really know where I'm going with this. But I thought that was an interesting comparison in the book. How it was a big deal to do these tests on the children, but nobody bats an eye about the snails or any other animals that they've tested on.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I actually didn't even think of that. Like, yeah, Hermione is so quick to like shut it down because they're testing on kids, but then like they'll go to Transfiguration class and basically it's like experimenting on animals because I mean, aside from Hermione, not everyone does a spell perfectly every time. So like, yeah, there is kind of a disconnect there. So that's a really good point. And I think it's even more of an intense disconnect when you see that it's Hermione, and in your brain you're like, wait, but I always thought she was like the activist of the series. Then it's like, well, not on everything.
Yeah. I mean, you got to start somewhere, I guess.
Yeah.
It would be nice to see if eventually she started including other animals in her activism.
Well, she's very like, not pro werewolf, but like, they're like, how should I put this? Like she wants rights and, you know, equal employment opportunities for other magical beings, including werewolves. And she's like shown as being compassionate to them. Like, I think when was it? Like there was a guy in the hospital at St. Mungo's that like had just turned into a werewolf and like everyone like felt really badly for him and everything. But yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna say it seems like she kind of stops after the beings and then
Yeah. That's a good point.
But there is Buckbeak. I mean, she cared about Buckbeak. So I think it's just once she has a personal like interaction with one, then she kind of realizes. Except for the animals used in class.
Yeah. Which, can we talk about poor Buckbeak for a second?
Oh, yes.
Like, he's just locked in an attic for the whole book. And I feel so bad for him. Like, that's not healthy or good.
At this point, Sirius doesn't really need him anymore. Right?
Yeah.
So set him free or something.
That was so frustrating to me. And I feel like, I mean, we kind of saw a lot of things from Buckbeak's perspective in book 3, but then after that he's just kind of an afterthought, and I don't like that part.
It's one thing when he's like living with Sirius in a cave, you know, at least he's outside, he can go out and do his thing, but keeping him in a room, it's kind of like keeping a horse in a stall and never letting them go out to graze on grass and do what they want to naturally do. So I'm surprised Buckbeak didn't like completely destroy the room and somehow like break out of there. And then the bag of dead rats was really disturbing too.
Oh yeah. But hey, Buckbeak's gotta eat, you know?
Yeah. I suppose. But he could go and like, you know, hunt for himself if they let him outside. But similarly, the owls also weren't allowed to go outside. So it's like they're not even getting full meals. They're just kind of like throwing them treats and stuff because they don't want to be like given away. But they're abusing animals in order to keep them secret. But another thing about owls I noticed in this book, there are a couple of mentions of alternatives to using owls. So Harry, when he's mad at Dumbledore, he says that he can there are other ways he can like send messages and communicate that aren't owls. And then in the ministry, of course, they used to use owls, but it was too big of a mess. So they figured out how to use paper airplane interdepartmental memos instead. And I know we've talked in the past about like alternatives to owls, like why do we need to use owls? It just doesn't seem effective. So I don't know, what could they use instead? Like I feel like they could just like enchant any object, like maybe not a broom because that's pretty conspicuous, but if they could just enchant an object and attach a letter, you know.
Oh yeah, definitely like the airplane memos thing. I thought that was pretty cool. But I mean, like, didn't also like, I'm trying to remember when this was in the book, but there was like a way that like Fox warned someone of something by like sending a flash of fire or something like that. So like I think that there are ways to communicate that they could think of other than relying on owls, which are actually not very reliable if you think about it, because like obviously Hedwig got like attacked and manhandled when she was like intercepted flying back to the castle with something for Harry, and like I feel like there are other ways that like magical means of communication would be less susceptible to like that sort of interference and security risk.
And potentially faster because they wouldn't need to stop to rest or eat. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, can you imagine how long it would take like to send an owl from like the US to London or something like that? Like
right. And they it seems like they do that kind of thing all the time.
Yeah.
Mallory said
sensitive.
if you can apparate, why can't you just magically transport a piece of paper? It's like texting. Like they could just get phones, okay? Figure out some magical phone.
Yeah.
Going back to Buckbeak, there were a couple of comments that I missed.
Oh.
Let's see.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the idea of turning the room into like Newt's briefcase. That's a good idea. Do we see anything like that in Harry Potter ever? We do. Hermione's bag, and the tent.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully they would think to do that. Like, could they not do that for their poor owls that have to?
Oh, I know, right?
Like, make them huge enclosures or something.
Yeah. Especially poor Hedwig. She spends a lot of time locked in that cage because at the Dursleys, they like wouldn't let her out for a while, and didn't they have a padlock on her cage at one point too?
Did.
Yeah, that she could have at least used one of those charms for a roomier space.
And yeah, the size of that cage, like she can't even stretch out her wings or anything.
Yeah.
Have we talked before about owls and like why don't they just fly away and never come back? Like they make it seem like the owls enjoy doing their job, or that like they're employed, but then they go out and they hunt for themselves, so they're really not employed. Like they're not even really getting fed. So do we think maybe they're just like somehow magically like restrained, or are we supposed to just accept that they enjoy and are okay with what they're doing?
Homing pigeons are a real life thing, or a like Muggle world thing, and they kind of work the same way, where you, for the most part, if you have them, you basically just have an enclosure that you put them in at night, and then otherwise they're just able to fly around, but they associate that enclosure as, oh, this is where I go to bed, so they just keep coming back, even if they're not really being fed that much there, or if they're, or like, their nighttime home is tiny. They just come back because that's how birds do, I guess.
I guess
Or
so.
how they're trained to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more of a training thing. I don't like there's never any specific mention of any charms placed on owls. I think it's just they were like I mean, in the same way a lot of animals in this world are, like they were trained to do certain things because humans wanted them to do it. And I guess if you have like a reward system set up, then they get that, you know, I've done this task, I get a treat, like, so therefore I'm going to do it again type of deal.
Right.
I mean, that's probably how they did that.
I've never had a bird companion, but I have heard about birds flying away. Kind of like any animal, like sometimes they run away.
Yeah.
So I guess it just depends on, selectively bred. That could be. And yeah, if they're raised and that's all they know, like, they're
I mean,
less
similar to
likely
house elves. They're
My
raised and that's all they know.
Right.
My grandparents rescued several parrots, and if given the chance, they would definitely escape. And one of them did succeed at one point. So I think it's their nature to run away.
Yeah, I would think so. Because I have more experience with like horses, and they're kept in stalls, and sometimes that they want to be there because it's shelter if the weather is bad, or that's where they eat. So, but if given the choice, most of them would not choose to go into the stall, like at least not all day. So
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I totally just like went through some of my notes from the book. And when we were on that topic of animal testing, I'd completely forgotten until just now that also Fred and George like put doxies in their pockets so that they could like test the venom when Mrs. Weasley wasn't looking. And I was like, ooh, that's another instance where Fred and George just are not doing good things with animals.
Skiving snack boxes are not vegan.
No, not vegan, not PETA approved, not cruelty free, none of that.
I think in the actual wizarding world, there's one of them that's vegan, but I can't remember which one it is. And it just has to do with like the flavor that they chose.
Oh.
But I can't even remember if you can get them separated or if you can only get them in the box. So if you can only get them in the box, then it's not vegan. So I've never had one. But yes, the doxies are interesting.
Yeah.
Which
because that in itself was interesting, where they were like de-doxifying the Black House. And I'm like, what are they going to do with all the doxies once they've stunned them with that, whatever I can't remember if it was like a powder or a spray or something.
Yeah.
Like, where do they go after that?
Yeah, well, at first I thought they were going to kill them. But then it was saying it just paralyzed them.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes me think that they're going to relocate them somewhere.
But you never see where they go. Right.
And I was wondering, like, why can't they just coexist with them? But it did say they're poisonous. But I feel like they could, I feel like the doxies would just stay in their little area if no one bothered them, because that's what they had been doing up until the point where they were attacked. War was waged on the doxies. So it's like similar to, I don't know, if there's like a mouse who's in your house, people are just like, no, you cannot be here. Like, you just can't be in here. It's just not possible. But they're not necessarily, like, if they're stealing your food, okay, but they're not necessarily hurting anybody. So it's kind of a difficult subject. So I see this kind of as like maybe they were trying to humanely trap them so that they could relocate them, but at the same time they were shoving them into a bucket, like cramming them into a bucket, which could potentially, I don't know, like suffocate them. And then they had collected their eggs, and it's like, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah. I mean, it's very much like, it reminded me of the like weird gray area of like what you just said, like the mice, and like, you know, how do you humanely trap one and set it free? Because most times, I actually came across this ironically when I was studying in London briefly, where I had a mouse in my flat, and I called the caretakers of the building, and I was like, hey, is there a way that you can get someone who's gonna like humanely release it? And they were like, we'll see what we can do. But I felt so bad because I was like, well, I basically just sealed the deal on that one because they did not sound like they were going to do it humanely.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing happened to me in my first apartment. I guess there's like a rat who had chewed a hole in my kitchen wall, and he would come in under the stove, and in the middle of the night he'd like open bags of chips and like steal them, and it was really terrifying at first because I thought someone was in my house opening chips. But they just sealed the wall, so I don't think they did anything to the rat. But yeah, I would never trust anyone to humanely deal with an animal, I don't think. Because even sometimes when you relocate animals, they'll die, just because they're in a completely different territory now, and maybe there are other territorial animals, or maybe they had a nest of babies, you don't know. The sanctuary that I volunteer at, they have mice everywhere in their barns, but they just let them live there, and it seems like it works out. So yeah, they're just,
I mean, if you want a more natural way to deal with mice, I guess you just get a cat.
Yeah,
because then it's actually like nature taking its course. Like,
there's a sanctuary in Denver, and they have like a huge rat population, and they like take care of them, and I think they give them birth control, is what the lady told me. So, but they're everywhere. Like there's a huge like fenced off area so that none of the other animals can get to them and bother them, and like they make sure that they're safe. I mean, that last time I saw them was like probably 2 years ago, so I'd assume if they're on birth control, there's no more. I don't know how that works, but yeah. I would think maybe they stop.
Maybe unless other ones move in, they could come by. You know, interesting. Are they rats or mice? Because the one I go to, they're like teeny tiny, cute little mice.
No, they're like big honking, like foot long.
Yeah, they're the big guys. Okay. I mean, I've never seen anyone else do that before, so it's great. But I always hear other people saying like, oh my gosh, there's a mouse, because that's just like the human reaction. Like, oh no, there's a mouse. Like, are you going to do something? Like, are you going to get rid of it? And it's like, no, they are living outside. Just like the birds, you know, there are birds everywhere.
The house I just moved into a few months ago had a major mouse problem. The people the house was in disrepair, and so we had a bunch of live traps and kept catching them, and thought we had, we went and sealed as many holes as we could find. Like we pulled out all of the furniture, all of the appliances and everything, and sealed the holes. And then we put traps near where the holes were with treats and stuff to try to coax all of the mice out, so that none of them got sealed into the wall, because we figured that would just be instant death. And then, we would release them down the road, which, like you said, it's probably instant death for them anyway. Like they don't have a home there, but they were, they're destroying the house, and it's very unsanitary. And here in Colorado, there's, I think it's called like Hunta virus. It's like super contagious disease. Like you just breathe in their droppings and it kills you in like 2 days. Like there's no cure, I don't think. But
no one ever told me about that.
But as far as I'm aware, it's definitely in Colorado. It's been spotted here. But anyway, so we finally solved the mouse problem within the house, but there's still a bunch outside, which those don't bother us. But inside, they were like getting in all of our food and ruining clothes and
I think the crux of the matter is just like to find the most humane way possible within your means and within the area that you're living in to help them not feel like your home is where they should be.
Right. Like if you're outside, I have no problem.
Yeah.
And yeah, the farms, it's like, what do you expect to happen?
Yeah.
Where I used to work, they used the glue traps, which are just awful.
Oh, I hate those so much.
And I was the troublemaker, and I would come in and I would always check them, and I would save the mice. And then they all thought I was insane. It wasn't a sanctuary. But the only thing I could think to do was to take them like into a forest that was like nearby, but not too far. Because if they came back to that location, they were just going to get trapped again. Yeah. So I don't know. I was kind of like, hey, I'm giving you a second chance.
Yeah, I think that's honestly the best you can do at that point.
Yeah. One of the mice that I saved, I had to use like oil, to get them unstuck. It was just so sad. She had babies that day. Like I unstuck her and then had her in a box to just kind of like settle. And then she had babies. So like imagine if she had babies while she was stuck in the trap. Anyway, we can move on from that subject. But
can we just like make this blanket statement? Glue traps are terrible. Don't ever use them. Like,
or any or the other kind of traps. I don't know what they're called, but
like the standard snap.
Yeah.
Things. Yeah.
I don't know how anyone could do that.
No.
Okay. Anyway.
Moving on.
Let's see.
We haven't talked about like the Thestrals at all. Unless you want to save that for next month.
I mean, we can talk about them.
They came up quite a few times actually in the book. Because they come up at first with the carriages, and then later I think Harry sees a couple flying over the forest. And then when Hagrid's class, Care of Magical Creatures, they meet the Thestrals. And then when the Thestrals take them to the Ministry, which we never kind of, I guess the Thestrals must have like flown back after that, but there's no like recognition in the book of like if they were helped or told to go back to the forest, or if they just kind of like did that on their own. So yeah, I want to hear like everyone's thoughts on the Thestrals, because actually those are like my favorite creatures in this book. Very misunderstood. Oh yeah, Parth mentioned that, that raises the question of riding them. Yeah, that's a huge thing. Like obviously the wizards and witches are using them as like we do with horses, like to ride, and with carriages. Which is interesting because a lot of wizards have such a negative view of them. Like they see them as like these grotesque sort of evil beings. That's a good question, Mallory. Can muggles see them? I'm not sure. Does anybody know if that was like expressly stated in the books, if even muggles who've seen death, if they can see the Thestrals? Where's Tyler when you need him with his infinite
I don't think they ever call it out specifically. They never bring up, the only thing they ever bring up muggles not being able to see that wizards can is Dementors.
Well, it might be similar then.
Yeah.
I'm actually trying to check and see if
I Googled it. And it says yes, but I don't know if I believe.
Well, it actually doesn't even... Oh, no, wait. I keep forgetting that Thestrals are under, like, a different category.
They're under winged horses, so they're not... Yeah. They don't have much of an entry.
Ugh, that's frustrating. Newt, why did you not write more about them?
I know, I want, like, a way more detailed version of Fantastic Beasts.
Yeah, because actually I'm going to show you guys like my copy. It's really, thin and small.
Yeah.
There's like so much more that could be added to it. But yeah, no, I'm trying to think if there's like a human or not human, like a real world analogy other than horses, because obviously we, see horses being used for carriages to their detriment, like to the detriment of their health. And then people also riding horses. But like, I'm wondering if there's another animal that like humans kind of consider the same way wizards consider thestrals, like the sort of like bad luck omen type of thing.
Black cat.
Sorry, what?
Yeah, she said black cats.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely one.
Yeah, that's
And in
true.
some cultures, owls, actually.
Oh really?
Yes, no, I growing up I was never allowed to own like any, like when I was really into Harry Potter, I was never allowed to own any sort of like owl jewelry because apparently owls are a symbol of death.
Oh wow. That's fascinating. Like I had no idea about that.
The what group?
My mom says albatross. Can you elaborate that, Elizabeth? If you want to.
For sailors, there was the old myth about albatross. If you saw the albatross, bad luck, and you want to really take good care of your ship. Otherwise, you might go down.
Oh, interesting. But I kind of like that thought that maybe thestrals are like the black cats of the wizarding world. Because I think they're cute.
Yeah. And this is also from Harry Potter, but auguries, it's
Oh, yeah.
they're like, that's what they are, right? They're an omen.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know too much about them, but
I think they came up in one of our podcast episodes, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that, because I may not be remembering correctly.
Are black cats considered a bad omen in Harry Potter? Because I don't think they ever
I don't think
have
so.
black.
aren't black cats associated with like witchcraft? So I feel like
Yeah.
if anything, they would be good in Harry Potter. But
Japanese
Yeah.
cat, like the Professor McGonagall when she turns into a cat, like they're never black. They
yeah,
Mhm.
that's interesting.
That's true.
Just black dogs. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That was a bad omen. The grin.
Although I don't know how anyone could see like an animal and be like, oh, bad omen. Like to me, I'm just like, aw, cute.
Right? It seems like they use snakes for that a lot. Like snakes are
Yeah.
a symbol.
Yeah.
Black
it just-
beetles. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure what black beetles.
I was just thinking like the Indiana Jones movies. They were always the ones that would crawl out of the cracks and like cover people. I don't know. It could be
Oh.
a movie thing. I don't know.
Those have
Oh,
a
like
name. What are they
scarabs?
called?
Is that like the mummy thing?
Yeah, the mummy. Yeah. Yeah.
Scarab beetles. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I thought they were a good luck omen, actually. At least in terms of like ancient Egyptian mythology. I thought scarabs were actually a good thing. Maybe I'm misquoting. I should probably like make sure I know what I'm talking about.
Well, they're definitely used as like a fear tactic in movies, and yeah, like Indiana Jones with the snakes too. I guess spiders are more used like that in Harry Potter.
Yeah, I guess black beetles are interesting. I'm reading something about European myths involving beetles. And if they were black beetles in the house, that was a symbol of like death or spirits. But for like African cultures, like for instance, ancient Egypt, it's more about like creation and rebirth and stuff like that. So I guess it kind of runs the gamut. Like it can be either good or bad omen. Oh yeah, Temple says they were associated with Egyptian sun god and luck. And for that reason, they were often buried with the dead. So yeah, both a good thing and a slightly, I guess in the European sense, they were probably more fearful of them. But yeah, it's just always interesting to me that like the wizards would see something so useful as also being like so grotesque and be like very averse to it, even though they're utilizing them, which in itself is problematic. But like, yeah, I mean, I guess we do similar things in other ways. Like people find sharks scary, but then other people like go and, you know, use their body parts for food, and maybe that's kind of similar, but I'm not sure.
And then when the shark does the opposite and hurts a human, which hardly ever happens, then it's like a huge deal. And everyone's afraid of sharks.
Like the Buckbeak scenario.
Yeah.
Like the one time he lashes out at a human, then every hippogriff is dangerous. Like
Parth says Jaws. Yes. And then we make movies about it to just make it worse.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, humans make all other predator species out to be awful and feared, but as Newt says, the most dangerous species is a human, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's
right.
something I think that like those films and screenplays like really gets right. I know this is a tangent, but like they definitely like bring to the forefront like kind of the thinking that Newt has, where like he recognizes he has a duty to like help these creatures be less misunderstood, and I don't think we necessarily see that in the original 7 books. Like we see Hermione kind of trying to act on behalf of another group of beings, but there's not really sort of the sense that like they're actually trying to understand other, like especially nonverbal beings like the Thestrals. Though I think Luna definitely understands the Thestrals.
And they were present too as Harry and Luna started to cultivate their relationship, which is obviously a very important plot point in the entire series. But it was also really sweet to see the Thestrals kind of usher in one of the few moments of peace for Harry, as he's obviously trying to navigate the PTSD of what happened in book 4 and wrap his head around all of the trauma that happened in the book before this. There was a little moment of peace that the Thestrals kind of offered, be a little, and not to talk about like the jobs they do for us, but they were present also as he was given a little bit of space with Luna to speak about death, to speak about his feelings, and start to wrap his head around the entire angsty Harry of this entire book, but offer a little bit of a reprieve in that moment.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's a conversation that I would love to get Allie in here to have about like kind of relationship with animals, you know, how like we do use them in terms of like emotionally, like they're good for us and stuff like that, but is that necessarily problematic or not? Like she has so many good thoughts on that. I'm pretty sure she'd love to talk more about that maybe in the next book club session. It's like our resident animal language and all that type of stuff scholar. I know that's a really good point. And I think like that sort of that like triangular like relationship of like, you know, Luna and Harry and the Thestrals, like I think it does, like you said, give him like a sense of peace and like not closure, but like I guess he feels like understood because someone else can see them too, like that type of thing. Yeah, anyone else have any more thoughts on the Thestrals?
Yeah, we can definitely consider continue that conversation next time too, because I think Allie will be here.
Oh yeah.
That'll be good.
Yeah, for sure.
Parth asked, what are your views on Grubbly Plank compared to Hagrid as a teacher?
Good question.
Anyone have opinions?
I think she's definitely like a good teacher. She definitely like, I feel like she almost reminds me of the people that are like, oh, I love animals, but then it's only like certain animals, like the more cute, cuddly, safe ones. Whereas Hagrid's like the exact opposite. Like he's all about the animals that aren't cute and cuddly and that people don't usually relate to. So I think like they're both like on opposite ends of the spectrum, and like they need to both meet somewhere in the middle. Yeah, Nicole said she's not the best at like grabbing the class's attention, like with the unicorn lesson, where it's basically boys to the back and then the girls get to like go and like actually meet the unicorns and stuff. Not even talking about what that says about the gender spectrum, but I mean, Temple said that like she teaches the students to be more thoughtful to their interactions, and that is true. That's something that Hagrid kind of like glazed over. He maybe said like, oh, don't disrespect the hippogriffs, but he didn't like really hammer that home. Like he could have been like, okay, this is what you definitely need to do, definitely don't do. And I think he only does that for the hippogriffs lesson anyways. I don't think he ever teaches them how to not get hurt or make the animals angry after that lesson.
Yeah, that reminds me about how bow truckles will gouge out people's eyes, which I kind of like in a weird way. For me, so yeah, Temple said she seems to have more respect for the creatures, for sure. I do feel like she is a little bit less passionate though. Like to me, it just seems like she's just teaching a subject and she's not like super enthusiastic about the creatures. So that's kind of opposite of Hagrid as well.
Yeah.
But I don't think she ever does anything like bad, right?
No, like, and I think she does pick like, I know we've had this discussion before where Hagrid was kind of picking animals that maybe weren't age appropriate or maturity appropriate for the students to learn how to work with. And I think that's something that Grubbly Plank actually does a really good job with. Like she picks creatures that are like suitable for the class level and the maturity level.
Yeah, and like it seems like her classes are a little bit more of just like learning about the creatures and maybe their anatomy and their characteristics. Not, here, children, take care of these creatures, and if you don't do it well, then they're gonna die. Like she's like, here's a bow truckle, draw the bow truckle and learn about like what they do. Not feed the bow truckle, but we don't know what they eat, so we'll hope for the best. So I can appreciate that. Like, I don't know if the students should be tasked with like, I know it's called care of magical creatures, but
yeah,
shouldn't trust children to take care of animals, really.
Yeah. Oh, my mom, Elizabeth, said Hagrid's choices for creatures to teach about weren't necessarily age or maturity appropriate for himself. Yes, sadly, that's true. He definitely gets in like way over his head. That's kind of funny. I would be curious who like each of us would pick as their ideal care of magical creatures teacher. Let's take a poll. Who would rather have Grubbly Plank and who would rather have Hagrid?
I'm gonna pick Hagrid, or no, Grubbly Plank, because I would feel so bad for the creatures, like, and I would feel so helpless because I'm like, I'm supposed to be learning how to take care of them, but if like with Hagrid, like you don't even know how to do it, so I would just feel awful.
Yeah.
Parth says Kettleburn.
Grubbly Planks, yeah, and a Kettleburn. We don't know that much about Kettleburn, but I'm assuming like he did a, or she, I can't remember if it's if he's he or she or whatever.
I don't know either.
They did a decent job because we never heard anything like bad about them other than like, didn't they like retire to like take care of their remaining limbs or something?
What about
maybe I wouldn't want to learn from Kettlebird.
What about Newt's like descendant?
Oh yeah.
What does he do? Does he do anything with creatures? Do we know?
I'm not that much into
Rolf? Is that his name? Rolf?
So I don't know.
Rolf Scamander? Because Luna marries him, right?
Oh yeah.
Rolf would be too young. Rolf is their age.
Yeah, that he'd be too young to. Well, maybe
right,
after.
right. Oh, okay. Well, maybe his parent.
Yeah, because.
But yeah, so we've got lots of Grubbly Planks. I would vote for Grubbly Plank.
Nicole says
Yeah.
Hagrid.
Nicole
Irrational and inexplicable loyalty.
Yeah.
Hagrid is more likable for sure.
Yeah, I think Hagrid's more like your chum that you like get along with, and like I think that's cool to have in a teacher. But
yeah,
I also think that there's a lack of like authority figure
and knowledge. Like you can't. I personally can't really respect a teacher who doesn't seem knowledgeable about the subject.
Yeah.
Like, why? How are you a teacher?
Yeah.
But his passion, it makes it like more enjoyable. He kind of reminds me of like the crocodile hunter. Even though the crocodile hunter, I feel like knew a lot more information, but like just the like enthusiasm.
Yeah. No, that's actually that's very true. And then Paris said Kettleburn, because he really gave himself to the creatures and lost limbs in the process. So yeah, I mean, I can see that, like having that much passion for the creatures where you wouldn't care if they chopped off a limb or two.
If only Newt Scamander was an option. That's who I would want.
Yeah. Too bad he wasn't an option. That'd be nice. But yeah, no, that actually, now that you mentioned that of like Hagrid being kind of like Steve Irwin, like I can't unsee that. Like that's such a good description. Yeah.
I'm a fan, but all right. Well, it has been an hour and a half. So I guess we'll wrap it up for this time, and then next time we'll continue our discussion. And I still have a lot more to discover in this book. So hopefully there's a lot more creature action in there. So our next book club is going to be Wednesday, June 30th at the same time, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Yes.
Yeah.
So if you want to keep going with this discussion, anyone who hasn't joined our Discord server, we would love to have you there. We have a nice little community that we're building, and we talk about food and our companion animals, and we can talk about Harry Potter and just anything really. So we would love to have you there. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us this time, and we'll see you next time.